Hey friend, listen. I know the world is scary right now. Corruption, war, inflation, demographics, degeneracy, disease, unrest, hatred, and despair. We didn't come here to tell you how it is, but that it's going to get way better.
Got a good thing coming, and it's all I need. Everything I wanted, just wait and see.
Better by Bitcoin.
That doesn't think it should go on 5 in the morning. Nothing will.
That song
man,
hits different at 5 a.m.
It hits so different at 5 a.m. Good morning, or good afternoon, depending on the part of the world you're in. Trying to do an early morning episode, testing something. If we keep running this way, we might need a coffee sponsorship. Shout out to all of the Bitcoin coffee companies out there. Please send us coffee. Anyways, awesome. We're going to continue kind of on the trend that we started kind of last time to just really, try and poke your emotional bear to make you kind of think and move and like shuck and jive in a new way. And so our topic today to kind of run through something a little more inspirational is this idea of measuring your life in moments, not in money. How can you measure your life in moments, not in money? How can you completely shift your thinking around everything? And, is it just shifting your base layer of unit of account? Is it, something completely different that, happens within you in the way you actually shift your base layer of just belief and understanding and all that stuff? And so I guess that's the topic and where to start. Bondor, do you have any, or maybe let's start with you, Corey, because you probably have the most, firing brain cells at the current moment in time.
Yeah, I've got
That's
very
true.
little.
I'm in Italy, so it's the middle of the afternoon for me. It is pre-siesta, though. This is probably the most tired on Italian time that you get. It's interesting you say whether it's shifting the unit of account. It's an odd question to direct directly to economics, but it was really important for me. Starting in a hyper fiat mindset and coming out of college with the idea that if you can make as much money as you can early in your life, then you free yourself to do the things that you really want to do, especially with your career and your work and your money later in your life before you retire. So, I think a lot of people that are on kind of a paycheck by paycheck trajectory picture spending the moments that they really want to value in their life closer toward retirement or after retirement. And my view, because I was in a position to, was to try to make as much money as possible so that I could become a patron of the arts. And I had this idea, this kind of number in my mind of what it would be to the point, where I would be the age I am now, 34, being able to then be a provider and my work would be meaningful in the way that because I would be like a capital provider for people who couldn't provide for themselves in an artistic capacity. That was kind of the goal. It kind of blew up fairly early on, and to go back to measuring your life in moments rather than money. I didn't totally understand how changing your unit of account to understand that would, how much that was affecting it. But if I had understood at the beginning of my career how quickly fiat devalues, I would have realized what an incredibly hard rat race I was getting into earlier in my career, and changing to a Bitcoin standard of account later in life made me realize the amount of work that I think I need to do over my life is actually a lot less than when I started my career. And then obviously, I eventually got directly into the arts, so my work was directly associated with the arts, and I kind of changed the career outlook. But thinking about the total amount of money that I would want to allocate toward, the things that I'm interested in, artistic endeavors, denominating that in Bitcoin allowed me to see every work project that I do as contributing directly to that, on a sound base layer, not on something that's not on ground that's falling out beneath me. And I think that's allowed me, even in the past kind of 7 years of working in film, I've done high paid things and I've done zero paid things because the mission has stayed exactly the same. So from a work perspective, living for, making moments out of that in a work understanding has been motivating in that I can take whatever job that I want, whether it's high paid, whether it's low paid, whether it's zero paid, just because I want it to exist. And that was my whole goal at the beginning of my career, when the only way I knew how to accomplish that with a fiat denominated mindset was to make as much fiat as possible. In a Bitcoin denominated mindset, I don't actually have to think that way anymore. I don't have to go do a bunch of work that I don't care about in order to provide for the other thing. It flattened all of that. It made it much more cohesive.
Hmm. Can you double tap really quickly on like the patronage ideation, or rather not ideation, but like you're in Italy, and one of the reason it is so beautiful is patronage, is people taking the time to see the value in things that are beautiful and giving people the time and space to find beautiful things. Why did that die? And can we ever get it back?
Yeah, I mean, it happened on a gold standard, right? It's important to remember that it was most of the beauty that you see around is driven by high net worth individuals and families and the church, and to some extent the government, but not really. You know, the vast majority of the beauty that you see um, here is driven by people who had excess wealth that wanted to do something that lasted beyond their lifetime, and so they invested on a long time scale. And I wonder if the Medicis had had a rapidly devaluing currency, what would have been their idea of extending their value out beyond life? It probably would have been even more financially driven than they already were, right? And they were bankers, and there's a lot of villainy in that family. It's not like they're nonstop heroism by any means, but the way that they invested their money was thinking vertically and thinking across time. And I think about that. What are the families today that are able to do that? And what is their priority? Their priority is making sure that their fiat value doesn't go down over time, which means their money has to be invested in financial instruments and profitable things across time. You lose the sense of what is enough for my goals, what is enough for my dreams, and that takes all of the whole idea of working in the moment, living in the moment, and it erodes it over time and forces you to say, all of my value has to go into preserving my value as well as creating more value, and then maybe there's enough spillover that I can actually make some sort of impact that doesn't have anything to do with fiat currency, but it's almost a lucky byproduct if you're good enough, if you're productive enough. And I think it's very stark here, because currently Italy is extremely fiat driven. It's extremely top down controlled. It is more profitable to not start a business than to start a business, even a successful business. They have financially disincentivized entrepreneurship and small business, and you see it. You see it in the quality of modern art and in modern film and things that they used to be outstanding at, and you see that erosion of beauty across time.
Anton, can you kind of piggyback on that? Because it's like one of the things Corey said was the like decision to find things are beautiful, and then also like the decision to be productive and the disincentivization of that. I know you've done like a lot of ad work for different types and groups of people. Would you kind of like, how would you unpack this idea of we're being incentivized to measure in money and not in moments, and it's because of politicians, or it's because of uh, the monetary layer, that you're being like that capacity to do so, measuring in moments, measuring in um, things that actually matter, is being stolen from you, and it's intentional.
My whole life, I've measured in moments, not in fiat. The difference between my life in my 20s, coming out of college, being essentially broke and valuing experiences And now, where I have established my career and I get paid a fairly high rate for the job that I do, is now I have a vehicle that I can take the excess and put it in where I know that the value is going to be preserved, and that place is Bitcoin. But I got really into Bitcoin around 2017, and at the time I thought that I was too late. I had been watching Bitcoin when the price was $200 and it had gone up to $600, and I thought I'd missed the growth in the value of Bitcoin at that time. And then the only place that I could find where I could buy Bitcoin was either local Bitcoins, where I would have to go meet up with somebody, and I didn't understand it well enough to even understand how to do a Bitcoin transaction. So there was Coinbase, and for whatever reason at the time, I couldn't get Coinbase to recognize my ID, and so I wasn't even able to buy Bitcoin. So by the time that I finally got approved to even buy Bitcoin on Coinbase, the price had gone from $600 to $1,000. So at that point, I'm like, well, now it's in a bubble, and so why buy now? And I didn't have any money, and so I was originally buying $25 to $125 at a time. I remember $125 at one point would buy you 0.1 Bitcoin, which is right now, as we're recording this, about $11,000. So 0.1 Bitcoin that I was buying for $125 is now $11,000. I can't predict what's going to happen in the future, but if you 0.1 Bitcoin that I was buying for $125 is now, hearing myself as a
Sorry.
It's all good. All that's just to say that I'm glad that I measured my life in moments, and I lived for those experiences, and I wasn't just cranking trying to get fiat, because at the same time the value of fiat has just gone down. So had I just put my money in and not had that sort of desperation to find some way to preserve the value of my money, I would have been completely living for the wrong thing anyway. So now people have the option to just put a little bit of the fiat money that they get for their job into Bitcoin, and maybe you can preserve some of the value of your work.
Bondor, would you what moments would you trade your Bitcoin for?
Well, I mean, I kind of wanted to jump off some of the things Corey was saying about how you get one life, and oh snap! Guess who just jumped in?
Oh my goodness!
Special
What
guest,
morning,
boys and
my
girls.
goodness.
Jordan Bush in the
Goodness
house.
gracious.
So the idea, you basically, for me, it was you go through school, you get essentially just public school, right? Brainwashed for 12 years, and then ultra brainwashed in college about, oh yeah, it's good. You got to get into crazy amounts of debt, and then you just got to work that off at some job. It doesn't matter what it is, because, well, if you don't, then you're wrecked because your debt will balloon. So your whole life is wrecked if you don't actually just slave away for decades, right? Like literally 30 plus years of just slaving away for somebody else's dreams or goals or whatever. And something about that, you're just like, oh, this is such a great idea. We're going to make so much money. And then you actually do it. And you're like, what on earth? Also the screaming in the background.
Oh, it's my children are losing their minds.
Oh, sweet. Love it. So yeah, Corey, it was a similar thing for me where it was like, I basically graduated college, got a job working in finance. It was like, finance is the worst. And then moved to entertainment. And I was like, this is considerably worse than finance. And yet I have to pay my debts. So what am I going to do? There's no other option. And basically had the incredible luck of getting inheritance money that paid off my debt in full, which I was then able to be like, okay, I don't need to do this anymore. So I quit, and it was essentially just got into film at that point. But that allowed me moments where I was like, oh, I don't have to work 90-hour weeks at a desk and hate my life. I can just like literally just sit in a coffee shop for 12 hours or whatever and like just hang and do nothing. And like, this is what I did for a lot of my 20s. But it was, for me, it was fascinating because it was like, oh, I get to like think about, decompress about what on earth have I just done? Like what was my upbringing? What was my indoctrination at college? Like what even are we doing here? Right? Like you guys are asking. And it was just like, that was, for me, it was like taking my 20s and just being broken, homeless and poor, and like, but having a free mind to actually be able to understand things and think about things. Obviously it leads you to Bitcoin because, well, oh, this is a different system. You get to eject from the other thing. Great, cool. This allows me to move forward on the other stuff. Allows you to move forward with everything else you want to do. It allows you to be like, oh, this is interesting to me. And that's not, so I'm going to pursue the thing that's interesting to me, as opposed to fiat, which forces you to say, oh, here's this thing that's not interesting to me. I have to pursue that. Here's this thing that I hate. I have to pursue that, or I'm wrecked. My life is over. That's all I got. Actually, I do have another great Steve Jobs quote, but I can't find it. So,
Jordan, welcome to the pod today. The big goal right now is hopefully any of the 40 some odd folks are watching, try to inspire at least one of you. I'm gonna tee up the question for you, Jordan, of like, how do you encourage people to measure their life in moments and not in money, and especially in a fiat denominated world, like understanding how difficult that is.
Yeah.
But I'm curious if anybody finds, or if you can kind of like, because I know you have a very unique perspective, just with what you saw in Uruguay and what you've just kind of like been really privileged to walk through life with people and kind of like help them get through stuff. But the quote is actually a Viktor Frankl quote, and if you're not familiar with him, folks, he was in one of the concentration camps, and I believe he was in Auschwitz. But when he was in the doldrums of life in a concentration camp, I believe he was a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and so he started psychoanalyzing everybody there. But his thinking was, when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. Can you unpack, Jordan, a little bit of how you saw people for better? Because I know there's a lot of negative instances of this, but like those people who saw the challenges before them and just completely changed their lives when the Bolivar, when Venezuela collapsed. Like, what did you see? Like, how did you see people like taking this whole thought of like, I'm not going to just be measured by this money that's evaporated. I'm going to measure my life and my worth a different way.
Yeah, I think a big part of it is just realizing how quickly your life can just radically change. I mean, like some of the people who were part of our church community, they moved to Uruguay. They were making over $100,000 a year, like 2 years before everything collapsed. And so like that reality was just like so sobering. I never thought about anything like that. I mean, just normally you're just like, all right, I have a career, I've arrived. If you're making $100,000, especially in a South American country, like you're doing well. And again, these were, I wouldn't say older, but I mean, late 40s probably. And so just that reality, it was just super stark just to think about, just to see that and see people trying to adapt to that, and then seeing their family forced to reckon with that as well. So like in the case of the guy I'm thinking about, he'd been married before. and he had a kid. He had a son who was grown by the time, we came to know him. And so they just had to, he's like having to deal with all that. And then like having to move away from his, move away from his son, move away from the rest of his family and try to find, a job. And so, I mean, I think that's one thing. The other thing that came to mind wasn't even so much isn't so much like the with the Venezuelans as much as, and this is especially, it's crazy that we're having this conversation this morning because I woke up, had Bible time, and then I hopped on my phone to see that this soccer player from my favorite English soccer team, Diogo Jota, just died. He's like 28 years old, just got married 5 days ago, and he died in a car accident with his brother, and I can't remember where. But it just stunned me. And I think that part of the thing that I think God has designed us to work this way is that death is this thing that reminds us of, the fact that life is a gift, the fact that, we're not promised tomorrow. Death is this thing that in most people's circumstance, they'll sometimes face it when they're younger, but it's really once you get into your 30s, you whether it's your parents or whether it's other people you work with or whatever, like you start encountering it with increasing frequency. And it's a gift, I think, in some ways. Obviously we wish that death didn't exist, but the fact that we experience death is like this thing that's designed to grab our attention. And I think it's really interesting and appropriate that the older you get, the more frequently you see, you're confronted with death. More of your friends die, and you just start to think about this reality more and more. And so I think that it really is one of these things that I think that in American culture, we do not do death well. we try to avoid thinking about it if at all possible. And I think there's obviously that's understandable, but at the same time, there's a verse in Ecclesiastes that tells us, that says, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. And I think that's just a reality. It's like, and that's just a wise way to live. It's just, just thinking about the fact that, I'm not guaranteed today. Am I living my life in a way that I'm going to be proud of, that my kids after me, my grandkids will be proud of? And obviously all of us have examples of things where that's just not true. And so I think that's designed to have a sobering effect on us so that we wake ourselves up, and then we just, try to live in such a way that, again, both God is honored, and then the people around us will be honored as well by the way that we pour our lives out for the good of other people. I just remember one last thing. I remember being in Uruguay, and there was somebody whose dad, I think it was their mom. That's what it was. It was somebody who's probably in their 20s, and their mom had cancer for a number of years, and she ended up dying. And I ended up going to the wake, and what they did, they weren't Jewish, but they had, like, just culturally, there's something like similar to like sitting Shiva. And so we just sat in the funeral home for probably, I was there for at least 2 hours, and there were people who were there before I was there and people who were there long after I left. And I just think that's another thing where, just sitting with people and like grieving together was just, I just was thinking, I'm like, man, I guess I experienced that to some degree. I had 3 family members die when I was in high school. But yeah, it's just not a thing that the average person, I feel like, experiences very much. I haven't experienced it that much. I've only experienced it 4 times in my life, and 3 of them were when I was in high school. So I think, again, people's mileage may vary with that. Some people are much more acquainted with grief and death. But I just think, the investing your life and investing yourself in having deep relationships where, part of the profundity of those relationships is walking through difficult things, including death. I think that is, embracing those things and not shying away from them. Are you guys familiar with the show The Bear? Okay, so Bear season 4 just came out, and one of the plot points is that the guy who owns this restaurant called The Bear, his brother dies, and at some point, basically he doesn't go to the funeral. That's like the thing. He just can't take it, and so it's like this big point of frustration between several of the characters. The fact that he just kind of bailed. He bailed on this time when they're all hurting. They were all just broken, and so just the idea of like of just for whatever reason, just not being there and not sharing in this experience was something that was very difficult for these characters. And I think that's a temptation for all of us, is just to try to eject from a situation like that rather than just sit in it and hurt and be there to hurt with other people who are going through hurt. Kind of rambling, but that's kind of what I would say.
A quote that I found in 3 words, I can sum up everything I've learned about life. It goes on. That's Robert Frost. Robert Frost is also the one who wrote The Road Not Taken. So that whole idea of a road less traveled was kind of popularized by Frost with that poem, and kind of what you're saying. And I'm very diligently trying to measure my life in moments and not in money actively every single day. Because for someone like me who has young kids, it is very easy to forget that the days are long, but the years are short. Walking through my yard, even just to come over here to start doing this, it's just littered with toys everywhere. And I used to be so frustrated by that. So frustrated. I'm like, it's not clean. It's not whatever. That's not forever. There's going to be a day where I just ache from a clean yard, right? I'm going to have different problems, different cares, different worries. But it goes on. Life is not going to care about the fact that I just want to hold my kid for 5 seconds because they're having a rough day or because I'm having a rough day. There's going to be a day where they pack up their car and they give me a hug and they never come back. And I think it's really hard sometimes for people to realize that one of the most important things about money is you can always make more. If you can find a way to add value, you can always make more money. But you can't always make more moments. Take that moment to squeeze your husband's hand. Take that moment to hug your mom. Take that moment to make that phone call. Take that moment to text that person you've been avoiding, I'm sorry, or text that person that you've been wanting to just pour into, hey, I'm thinking about you and I love you. Because just like Diego Jota, you might not get that chance. So do it.
Yeah, I'd just add too. I mean, the Diogo Jota one was so alarming, right? Obviously, prime of his life. Jordan, I don't know what wages he was on, but probably at least 180K a week or something like that, right? 3 beautiful children. And those are the alarming things that can shake us out of complacency and force us to think about that in our own life. But the counterpoint, it's not really a counterpoint. I guess it's a layer of nuance, to quote a TV show. If you watch BoJack Horseman, the former TV star who happens to also be a horse, but he was already made all of his fame and fortune, and he's looking for meaning kind of the rest of the show. And the very last line of it is one of the characters says, "Yeah, life's a bitch, and then you die." And then he says, "Yeah, sometimes life's a bitch, and you keep on living." Which was such an excellent button for that whole show, because he's searching for meaning the entire time. He's like Viktor Frankl, but an aged TV star, and can't find it at all. And I think one of the things you lose when you think about the morbidity at the end of your life is that the individual moments, like if we believe that the wages of sin is death, where I used to read that as a threat, and now I just kind of read it as a statement of fact,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
It's like you can do kind of whatever you want,
Yeah.
but you're allowing little moments of life or little moments of death into your life,
Mhm.
based on the choices, based on how you live every day.
Mhm.
The real world kind of artistic, fiat example of this for me is that in the film world, um, over the past couple of years, the institutional money that's been backing independent projects has tanked significantly. So most of the projects that I've gotten financed have been from people at the end of their life,
Mm.
generally sad, divorced,
Mm.
with a baby boomer mentality, who were told that security, financial security, was the highest value. And
Mm.
when their grandparents were in the Great Depression and their parents were in World War II, you can understand, you can have some sympathy for why that was their greatest value in life. But man, are they unfulfilled, right?
Mm.
I had someone back a project who's going through a divorce. His kids don't talk to him, and he honestly just wanted to hang out with some cool dudes that were doing something interesting. That was the only
Mm.
reason, and he had no idea what to do with these millions and millions of dollars that he was sitting on,
Mm.
and thought it would be interesting. That to me is death before you're dead,
Mhm.
right? And it's a
Mhm.
series of choices over many, many years that have gotten you to a point where, most of your life is already dead before you're actually dead. And that to me is
Mm.
the saddest thing, right?
100%.
Um, how do you collect the moments that are adding life, that are giving life, whether they're work or whether they're time with your family, or whatever they are? Over resting, right? Over time, over extending time with your family and not providing enough value for them could also be an abdication of responsibility that contributes to death, right? There's a continuum there, especially as a man who needs to provide for his family. Um, but what are those things that are actively adding to your life, every day, so that even if you do live to a ripe old age, you're actually living that whole time.
I think one other thing I'm just like thinking about that, and I never had this thought. Like I'm not some okay. I'm not some like giant Bitcoin whale. Like I just like I was a missionary when I got into Bitcoin. It was like 2019. So like I don't have like tons of Bitcoin. But like what I was
Sure, Jordan.
so
How
like I
much
was
do you
just
have?
What's
not
your
enough.
seed phrase? Do you have 24 words that you
Uh,
really like you'd want to put out there?
Yeah. So I just was thinking the other day, like I've obviously I don't even think about, the day, like actually being able to do something with Bitcoin. Like I'm just like, I don't have, I'm not going to retire anytime soon. But then I was talking to my wife the other day, and my oldest is like 14 years old. And just the reality that we have like 4 years, this isn't precisely true, but like the idea that, before he'll likely go to college or to like a, VOTech training program or something like that. We got four good years left. And so like one of the things that I've thought about is like, I mean, if Bitcoin went to $500,000, okay, like I don't live in California. So like my standard of, living, like what we live on is like significant. Like it's much lower than that would need to be if we lived in certain other places. But there's part of me that just, I really for the first time just thought, what if I just like sold like what would be, I mean, a meaningful amount of Bitcoin relative to myself. Like like the thing that I can't get back is time with my kids while they're young, while they're in this last 4 years of my life. So like, would I be willing to sacrifice, I mean, a good chunk of my stack to be able to just like spend meaningful time, like to take the monetary pressure off of my life for the next 4 years? And again, obviously not everybody can do that. I can't even do that to like to the degree of what other people's lives would look like, but relative to like how, little we live on and like what we need, like, is that something that I should be willing to do? Because that's the real scarce thing that I can't ever get back. And the more that I just think about it, I'm like, I think I should be willing to do that. And I think I am willing to do that. Again, it wouldn't be like I wouldn't be not working.
Do it.
Yeah. And
Do
like I
it.
wouldn't be
Correct.
not working. It just would remove some of the pressure to work to the degree, that I am. And so again, I'm not saying like this is something you should do when your kids are 4 or something like that. Like, but just like I think it's something that we should at least be considering, is just thinking about, hey, there's certain seasons of our lives, the lives of our family, the lives of other people who we're in community with, where we could actually think about this backwards, like where we tend to think about, oh, I'm going to retire, for these last years of my life. And it's like, what if we just thought about retiring for a certain period in the middle and then we just kept working because we could work together, or like, I don't know. I think that Bitcoin could enable us to think differently than, or I mean, I guess maybe you wouldn't even necessarily need Bitcoin, but I feel like for a lot of people who wouldn't otherwise be able to do so, Bitcoin could help them, maybe help them think differently and be able to act differently in accordance with their thinking differently.
Can I ask a question off of that? And I kind of want Bondor's reaction to this, because I think you've been in the deepest orange pill for the longest out of the group. There's almost a religious like attachment from an area of this community that I think to some extent each of us share, but we all have a religious attachment that's higher than that. Do you think there are going to be people who were on the absolutely never sell any train for most of their lives that end up kind of like the boomers I was talking about before, that just have a huge stack and nothing else in their lives? And congratulations, you held on to all your Bitcoin, but why didn't you sell some to live your life?
Yeah.
Do you think that's, do you see that coming?
Possibly, but at the same time, there's obviously a lot of layers there. One of the things that we see in fiat culture is this disordering of priorities. So if you're disordering your priorities, like, you're going to value your job more than your family, you're going to value whatever, casual sex more than long-term stable relationships. And it's just like the complete disordering of all this other stuff, right? So Bitcoin, because it's not like, it's deflationary, but it's not demurrage. It's not going to flip inflation around and say, haha, we're going to do the exact opposite. What it does is it's just targeting zero inflation. It's just a just weight and measure, right? So I think, and who knows, but I think that pushes people towards correctly ordering their life, right? Like, if you're in an inflationary world, you're going to value things in a disordered way, and that's going to create the absurd boomer mentalities and things that you're talking about. And if we just map that to a Bitcoin ordered world, but don't reorder everything because Bitcoin's reordering everything, well, then, yeah, you're going to get people who are in their 60s, 70s, 80s and have never decided to try and get married, or never decided to try and have kids, or never did, and they're just going to have a fat stack and it's like, whatever. Sailor. But that's just total fiat in my mind, because at the end of the day, if your when you lower your time preferences are going to say, oh, well, at some point I should just expect that I'm going to die. Well, okay, then you work backwards from that. The fiat mindset says, no, whether or not I die in the future, I don't even have time to think about that. I literally just have the next couple of weeks or a couple of days or a couple of months where I got to figure out the next thing, right? And you just go through this treadmill of figuring out the next thing for the next 70 years, and you never actually realize that, oh my gosh, this is the end. So maybe this generation of Bitcoiners is going to have a fat stack and never actually do anything, or the next generation or a couple of generations after that. But at some point, I think the ordering becomes correct. And at that point, you're going to see civilization really take off, where all the ordering is correct for the largest amount of people.
A lot of the silent generation thought about, how can I leave the most to my grandkids? Many boomers think about, how do I die with zero? They don't even think about leaving anything to their grandkids. And a lot of Bitcoiners now are thinking, how can I leave Bitcoin to my grandkids? And so what if you don't spend any Bitcoin, but you set up your grandchildren with the values that you preserve during this time and you give them wealth. So Bitcoin can possibly help you leave a legacy in a way that is completely impossible with fiat. You might be able to leave some property to your grandkids, but there's going to be property taxes and all kinds of things, maintenance, things attached to that, tenants, if you're a landlord. With Bitcoin, we have a way to give value to future generations, and it is completely independent of geographical location. And it's possibly the first time ever, because even if you gave your grandchildren gold, you have to transport that somewhere. With Bitcoin, there's no transportation.
How do you guys think because you've already seen it with the internet, right? You don't have to transport information anymore. You can shitpost it from the toilet, literally and figuratively. And so the thought I was gonna get like at least a wry smile for that one. The absolute transfer of value across the world instantaneously or in 10 minutes, depending on if you're using Lightning or on the main chain. How do you think that is going to restructure the way we actually value moments? Because is Bitcoin the microwave of money, and is the relatively instantaneous transfer of value anywhere in the world actually going to do more harm to this idea that we should be valuing moments more than money, or is it actually going to make it better? I'm curious your thoughts.
It's a good question. I think, man, there is part of me that thinks that we need more like that. So one of the temptations is to think that limitation is bad, and so something like trading hours, like we only look at trading hours for the stock market. We're like, oh, this is such a bummer. The fact that there's times where I can't invest, or there's times where I can't do these things. Like I'm missing out on the ability to trade on nights and weekends or whatever. Or again, we could look at this in 100 different ways. I can't work if before electricity, I can only work when the sun's out. There's a temptation to look at all these limitations as like just big bummers and, sucks on our time, and impediments to productivity, impediments to progress. And at the same time, I think that there like so many of these limitations are gifts. Like they're designed to add structure and help us, live in such a way that's rightly ordered, that produces, the best outcomes given. I mean, I would argue like God's priorities for making the world. And so, I mean, there's our bodies need a certain amount of rest that incredibly corresponds with the amount of time, roughly the amount of time that the world is dark every day. And so I think that, you've seen something like if somebody asked somebody 400 years ago or 500 years ago, would you like the ability to have a sun all day long? They would have been like, well, yeah, that'd be great. But one of the consequences of that is now people are dealing with all kinds of, they use this, reality resisting technology in ways that do produce not just all kinds of good. Obviously there's a ton of good, but they also produce and can kind of structure and bend the world in ways that are at odds with human flourishing and at odds with structural flourishing for a lot of people. And so I think that obviously there's going to be tons of good as it relates to a 24/7 365 monetary system that will produce all kinds of it's going to be good in a ton of ways. I think there's also going to be just ways in which there's going to be downsides as well. Everything is trade-offs, and so I think that's how we have to look at it. Is there's trade-offs, and there's going to be things that are great, but there's also going to be ways in which this changes the structure of society even more. And I'm just thinking of like a Sunday. So like, there's like Sabbath laws exist and have existed for, like Sabbath practices have existed in many faiths for a long time, as long as there's been people. And when you have, in there's been places around the world where everything will shut down on a Sunday. All the businesses are closed and everybody gets a day of rest. And then as you've had a secularization of society, those kind of things have gone away. And so what that means is that you have, people who are working, some people are working 7 days a week, some people are working and so it just has all these downstream consequences. So I'm not so optimistic that everything's just going to be sunny. I think it's going to have downsides as well. But again, on the margins and even beyond the margin, there's going to be a ton of ways in which this system and the ability that like Bitcoin's going to enable a lot more good as well. So I don't want to lionize it and act like, we're going to enter this utopia where like I don't think that's the case.
You heard it here first, folks. Jordan Bush is a shitcoiner.
I don't understand.
Jordan Bush doesn't believe that Bitcoin fixes everything.
Amen.
I don't know how he got on this podcast.
Amen.
Jordan Bush is Roger Ver.
Too far. One point that I wanted to circle back around to that I thought was interesting is the idea of like when you get older, you're like more exposed to death, and therefore you're more like inclined to like really think about these things and all this other stuff. Like I thought about this, and I'd love to just throw this out to the group and see what you guys think. But I'm curious to see how this comes about for all of society on a Bitcoin standard. Because right now, when you are entering, the last 20 years of your life, and you recognize that your time is short and you're constantly reminded of it because you see your friends and family dying, right? Well, that's an extremely high time preference scenario. That says all the things I need to do now, because if I don't do them, and just I know that I'm not going to be able to last here much longer. I got to start really increasing my time preferences, right? Like as you get older, your time preferences are going to like at some point like limit is 100, right? Or limit infinity, right? Like you're going to be on your deathbed and you're going to have in your the thought in your head, I need to tell this person this thing, right? As opposed to something else. So in a fiat world, that's just accelerated to the extreme. You've lived your entire life under high time preference, and now on your deathbed, you're in a high time preference. And so you get these really bizarre outcomes of old people making crazy decisions, right? Which is what I think, Corey, you were talking about. But so in a low time preference world where you've lived your entire life in a low time preference, planning for the future, thinking about all this stuff, like going through the paces of making good choices and good plans and all this other stuff, rightly ordering your life, etc. On your deathbed, where the time preferences are the highest, what do you guys see happening?
I think Steve Jobs has a great take on this. There's a quote in a video floating around by Steve Jobs where he says something to the effect of, I am not so foolish as to think that what I am doing is going to last 1,000 years. What we're doing at Apple is sediment. And what he then went on to explain is when you look at rock, it has all the striations in it, right? As a generation dies, it's laid down, and then a new generation builds on top of that, and then a new one on top of that, and then a new one on top of that. And then when an archaeologist comes and they, cleave the rock and then they look at it, they're like, wow, that's interesting. We can look and kind of track what's happened over time. And to your question, I think we all need to understand, and in the same way that biblically, I think it's a lot easier for Christians to kind of think through this, but it's like we, from dust to dust, we're reminded constantly that from dust we came, from dust we will return. And if you have that perspective, that's actually that's an infinite perspective. And I actually have a lot of respect for Satoshi with this perspective, because Satoshi made a 100-year currency. Satoshi designed Bitcoin to stop kicking out, or rather stop being mined in the year 2140. So roughly 100 years from kind of when it started, or a little bit more than 100 years from when it started, because the assumption is something better will be found. And in my mind, that's the same as building cathedrals. You know, I constantly am trying to encourage people and trying to encourage myself to think about, what is the cathedral I want to build in my life that I will never see completed? You know, people, when they were building cathedrals back in the day, they might work on a gargoyle that they were never going to see on top of that building, or they might work on, you know, the cornerstone in the base of the building that they would never see completely erected on top of that cornerstone that they placed. You know, these buildings took hundreds of years to build, and like the Basilica in Colombia is still being built. And I think if we can put our minds and our vision and our eyes towards a future we may never see, that is actually how we can live with the lowest and fastest, or rather the lowest and highest time preference at the same time, because you can have a sober take on everything. Because even if you are on your deathbed, you know that there is work that you will never finish, and that's okay, because that's how it's designed. Like, we are designed to hand off the torch. And so I think that is a very difficult thing for somebody who's an atheist to, or rather my perspective, to grapple with, because we're taught in our microwave culture that you can push a button and get a ride, or, you know, you can make a phone call and solve something. You know, you can move mountains with your effort. But what we're told in the Bible is the only way you can move mountains is with your belief.
Hmm.
And so if you can believe in a future that you will never see, but align your life to that future so you can point people towards it, you can and you will make the world a better place.
Yeah, I think what you're getting at is the economy of the kingdom of God, so to speak, is if there's something eternal, you know, if
Did,
Jesus
did
returns and
somebody
builds
say
the kingdom of
economics
earth.
of glory? I think that's what economics of
Whoa,
glory.
whoa. Big if true.
Big if true. Go on, Corey. Sorry.
Is there a book about that?
Not yet.
If you look at you know, if you look at the what is actually eternal, what lasts, and you and the economy of God flipped the power dynamic of humanity. The humanist power dynamic is control. The economy of God is sacrifice, right? Um, the use of power for the sake of people who don't have it. Um, that's an eternal thing, and you know that, right? If you have the Christian faith, you know that if you do that, that is an eternal thing. And even like you're saying, JD, if it's a very, very tiny piece of an enormous cathedral, if it lasts, that will still supersede anything else you could do with your time, right? Even so, to me, that's kind of the definition of humility. I'm going to do something extremely small, which is the only thing I actually can do that is eternal, and that is more valuable than anything else that I could do that would just pass away, even though it doesn't necessarily look like that on a short time frame. Um, it feels like when you have a theological point like that, it feels like bringing up Bitcoin is insane, but it's so far in an imperfect through smoke and mirrors way. It's so far as the only economic reality, physical reality that reflects that in any way. That you know, once you transfer value into that, you know where it is, and you know that it can't change. It's not eternal, like you said, JD. It's 100-year solution, maybe. Reasonable minds discuss how long you know it will be the solution. Maybe 200 years, maybe, you know. But I know it's a lot longer than the U.S. dollar, which is currently the best. If you throw out Bitcoin, that's currently the best other thing you can do. Or call it the S&P 500, right? If that's like the best investment that you could project over 50 years, it probably is, apart from Bitcoin. Bitcoin reflects that truth that Christians have been trying to communicate for a long time. And you know, just to the Christians, if you're living in the dichotomy between knowing that the kingdom of God is eternal and knowing that you want to work for the kingdom of God, and then every way that you actually interact with the world is engaging with a power dynamic in a monetary system and everything that the monetary system touches, which is almost everything that you do in your life. And all of those are opposed to you. Bitcoin will just make you a little bit more aligned, kind of a lot more aligned with the economy that you actually want to be living in.
I think the biggest thing that you just kind of triggered in my mind, Corey, is the economy you want to be living. Excuse me. The economy you want to be living in. Like that conjures up this like reaffirmation of, you know, kind of coming back into the cathedral you want to build. I think a lot of times our culture is constantly pushing us to look beyond our sphere. It's like, you know, keeping up with the Joneses. But I think the most important thing that we can be reminded of is that our cathedral is our family. Your cathedral is your community. Like that thing that you're building is your kids. It's your friends. It's your family. Like we're so caught up, I think, in a lot of different things and like what we can physically do or what we are physically adding value to that we forget that there actually is a cathedral in our mind, you know, our temple, our body. You know, this is also a cathedral that people can look at and find beauty in. And one of the people who's looking at that is also the person staring back at you in the mirror. And so I think don't be so foolish as to think that you have to build cathedrals that people can see and touch and feel. But also don't be so foolish just to think that those ones also don't matter.
That's a good word. There's a fantastic book. If you're somebody who's listening to this and you're like, these guys have talked about the Bible a bunch. The Bible is this opaque thing to me. I don't understand it. Where do I begin? There's a book called A House for My Name that's basically designed especially to basically explain the Old Testament. And one of the things it basically acknowledges is that one of the ideas that's used to describe what God is doing throughout human history is he's building a house for his name. And so obviously houses can have, this could be, you can think about a house literally, but you can also think about a house like it talks about, as one example, it talks about the house of David. The throne of Israel will never depart from the house of David. And so it's basically saying that one of David's descendants will always sit on the throne as a king of Israel. And so this idea of a house is getting at exactly what JD was just talking about. This idea of like, this is a group of people who, you know, a family. And so then you see this kind of thing, expand and grow over time to where in the Old Testament, you have like a physical, where people go to worship God as a physical place. So, the garden was a place where humanity worshiped God. Then you have the tabernacle was a physical place where people would go to worship God. That later was replaced with a permanent place, which was the temple. And then once you get to the New Testament, you have the Apostle Paul describing a community of Christians as the temple of the Holy Spirit. This is where God dwells, not in a physical location that's built with hands, but something in a place that's built by the Spirit of God. And so this reality obviously has its it has its climax, from the scriptural standpoint in this spiritual community. But there's also a smaller yet no less real reality that you as an individual, like God, as a Christian, like God lives in you. It's also true that you, as your family, like you are a small house, like you are a house that is either being built up or torn down. And so I think that for a lot of us, like we could do well to think about our own individual lives and then also our families in this way, and thinking about, building a family through, just through the choices that we're making and just thinking intentionally about these choices, about how we're building. There's a couple of parables where they talk about like the man who didn't count up the cost before he started building, and he gets like halfway through and then he doesn't have enough money to complete the thing, and then everybody makes fun of him. This is a known thing, and this happens to people with their families. Yeah, exactly. It happens to people with families. It happens to people with their lives.
We just asked Bill We just passed a bill actually that reflects that perfectly.
Exactly.
No. That bill gave us enough money. It's really complicated, but we have enough money now.
I must just not understand.
I
I'm sure
just
they have a
trust
good way to
Trump.
pay for it.
I just trust Trump.
I'm sure they
is
can pay for
simplicity.
everything.
So yeah, so it's just one of these things where, you know, counting up the cost, and obviously there's always limitations in our ability to do this, but insofar as it depends on us counting up the cost and counting up and just thinking and planning out in advance, like what we want our lives to look like, and trying to get wisdom from different sources in order to do that well, is something that I think that a scarce money should promote more thought towards. It should orient us to think more that way, which I think is going to be good for everybody.
Fiat has heightened our time preference unimaginably. I was reading Acts 7 yesterday, Stephen's speech, and something jumped out at me when he mentioned Abraham was told by God that his people were going to be enslaved for 400 years. That's such a long time. That's probably 13 generations. And nobody right now is thinking about 24, 25.
Yeah.
And Bitcoin suddenly gives us a way to think about things in the future because it gives us a money that can sustain value into the future. Whereas fiat is like, how do I get, okay, I might be able to make some money right now. I might be able to hustle up some money. How do I get rid of that money and get that money into something? And so it just heightens it gives us this frenetic energy and heightens our time preference.
It's really interesting, the notion that, like, the thing that I keep seeing pop up everywhere, and especially because of like Zoe Saldana or whoever it was who's running for mayor in New York.
Not Zoe Saldana.
It's the same thing. They look about the same. But it's true. I was like, what? But the main, like, losing my thought and trying to be serious, but the universal basic income, I'm feeling like that's missing the plot, because my current thesis on universal basic income, you know, and Elon's like, it's going to be needed because AI and Optimus and all these AI bots are going to take over the world and you're not going to need to do anything. I think universal basic income is coming, and I think we are going to see the largest revolt in human history against technology when that happens. Because, you know, as it says in the Bible, without vision, the people perish. And if you only have a UBI vision of your life, I'm just going to exist and play Nintendo and eat Cheetos or whatever it is, a lot of bad is going to start happening very quickly.
Don't you feel like that's already started though, to an extent?
Yeah, like we're still already there. Yeah,
I think we're already there.
there.
I think we're already there, but I think it's going to get a lot worse. And it's kind of like what we're seeing in, you know, you're experiencing this now being in Europe, probably a little sheltered from it where you are, but, you know, we have an Italian family member who's been staying with us for a minute, and their perspective on everything is that people in Italy don't want to do anything because, as you said, because they're disincentivized to do so. However, Italy feels like it's reaching a fever pitch because it is so depressing. Like, they have a passeggiata, so they have a thing where they basically are very quick to take life at its pace. It's probably the best way to say that. But that can only go on for so long. Like, you can only have one generation that's just like, because then the next generation is like, shit, like, we got to fix that. Like, we can't let that live here forever. And even if you stick an AI on it, or you stick an Optimus bot on it, like, the problem you're going to run into is like, okay, now we don't know how to do anything. And we literally are dependent on these robots. And now we're dependent on whoever makes these robots. Like, it's going to put mankind in a very desperate situation. And I hope it comes sooner rather than later. And I'm personally optimistic that it's going to be the dead internet and UBI that get us there.
Hard disagree, but okay.
I don't know if we ever get to the UBI level of it. what I'm curious about is the current kind of millennial Gen Z who has some of the boomer mentality, that has the work, buy a home, increase value, retire mentality, which still is a lot of people. It's a huge voting block. It's most of the middle and upper class. And if you project out, I think it's on my mind because of the bill that just passed, but when you lock in a deficit of the size that we just did into the future, right? And there's now, I think we all had about 6 months where we thought maybe they're going to have some fiscal responsibility, the new administration. And then this comes out and there's no fiscal responsibility at all, like none. You lock in a higher deficit where 25% currently of all tax revenue is already interest payments on things that are already paid for. The debt hit 37 trillion this month in uncommitted liabilities right now, in addition to that 37 trillion going out as far as we have liabilities. It's $200 trillion. And we don't even, I mean, it's so, the number is so broken that the only way out, obviously, is to print. It's the only possible, that we backed ourselves into the only possible thing. But my view is for people, in their mid 30s who are making good money, who are buying homes, who are investing in equities and doing and the bond market and the traditional things that were utilized to build wealth, that could just completely go away over 20 years. It doesn't have to be a big dramatic thing. It doesn't have to be a big debt spiral. It doesn't even have to be a housing crisis. It just means that where you could assume that you could make 8% a year, and if you invested well, you're going to retire well with a good job. If that just starts to erode upward from purchasing power and downward from downward pressure on equities and downward pressure on real estate, which is already happening, what does that do to the mindset of all of those people who have over and over again just made quote unquote the right decision, and then by the time they're 50, they're actually farther away from the financial stability they were looking for than when they were 30? I think that kind of existential crisis worries me more than like a proletariat revolt or something like that.
I think it's very likely that we get a lot of people who are just striving to get a dumpster full of silver coins.
It's just okay. I mean, for me, I kind of look at it like this, and this is a gross oversimplification. Of course, there's nuance and complication, et cetera, et cetera. But for me, it's like there's you can kind of group humanity into two groups. Just never do this because it's terrible. But there's a group who basically values self-indulgence, and there's a group who basically values self-righteousness. And both of these things are like not good to value, right? But like call it a sin de jour, or like the inclination of your heart is gonna, like, you can almost say like all sins can kind of just be lumped into one of these categories. Is it just immediate pleasure, self-indulgence, or is it just immediate pride, like doing the right thing, right? Self-righteousness. Okay, so if you accept that premise, which you should reject, you can kind of look at the world through that lens, which becomes interesting in that, well, everybody who's successful over the last 50, 70 years, they've all taken the self-indulgence route of, oh, I'm just going to get into a whole bunch of debt and pay it off later or whatever. It's like, it doesn't make any sense. It's not the right thing to do. But like, I know that the debt's going to devalue, and I know the currency is going to devalue. So like, I'm just going to indulge in as much debt as I can. And then the economy just rewards them for that, because the debt does devalue, the currency does devalue. They've taken on all this debt to buy hard assets. Indulgence treadmill, and they just go for that, right? Under Bitcoin world, it's just reversed. Okay, all the people on the self-indulgence inclination, they start losing agency and they start losing value, but that's just replaced by the people on the other side of it, the people on the self-righteous side. They start gaining agency, they start gaining the value, they start gaining the world's political power and influence, right? So for me, I just see, oh, it's just going to be a new set of people in control. Now, hopefully Bitcoin lowers the time preference and the self-indulgent or the self-righteous people begin to turn more to Jesus. I mean, just as the self-indulgent people did, like the Jesus, like the Jesus hippies or whatever it was called in like the 70s. Like that was a huge, like, oh yeah, Jesus is the ultimate self-indulgent solution, just like Jesus is the ultimate righteousness solution. My goodness, I can't speak. But yeah, so the point is, from my perspective, a lot of this stuff kind of just solves itself, and on balance, because fiat is a horrendous evil and Bitcoin is not, on balance, we're going to have better outcomes anyway, no matter what. So
we'll go around the horn because we're getting to our mark for the end of it. Do you guys have any final thoughts on just kind of any of the topics from today? But measuring in moments, not on money. This idea, the bigger thing about I guess this makes me a shitcoiner too, but it's like Bitcoin isn't everything. but what are your takes?
I have a very quick final thought. I've been thinking about this the whole time. Yeah, Bitcoin isn't everything. It's not everything. So when it comes to measuring in moments and not in money, I feel like I'm speaking all the time to people who aren't quite Bitcoiners yet. They're listening to us because they're kind of trying to figure out, what is this thing? I'm really interested in it, but I'm not completely sold. It's okay to spend Bitcoin on things that you need. If you need a house for your family, even if you want to take your kids on vacation, it's okay to spend some Bitcoin. We're not trying to judge anybody or guilt them into hodling Bitcoin forever. It's also good to stack sats and preserve a bunch of wealth in Bitcoin and even leave it to future generations. Both things are okay. If you go buy a house right now, that house might lose value in terms of Bitcoin, but if it provides value to you and your family, that's a good thing. So it's okay. Just make wise financial decisions, and you have this gift that is Bitcoin. We are very early. The value of Bitcoin is going to go up into the future. So just be a little careful spending Bitcoin. If the price all of a sudden skyrockets and you can then go and do something that is going to preserve moments in your life, it's going to give you memories, do that thing. Just know that we're still early and the value of Bitcoin is going to skyrocket in the future. It is going to grow in value over time. And you have to make your own decision on what to do with that knowledge. We're just giving you the knowledge.
I'll keep mine super short. Bitcoin fixes almost everything. Don't try and force it to fix everything.
JD, any last thoughts?
I think the most important thing you can do in life is to really ponder and consider what you are measuring in. Because if you're measuring in the number in your bank account, you're measuring in something someone else controls. But if you're measuring in the impact you have on other people's lives, the moments that you give them of joy, of pleasure, even of discipline sometimes, of correction, of inspiration, then you're probably measuring in something that's actually going to accrue not as fast, but in a way that is going to make you feel way more fulfilled when you're laying on your deathbed and you're surrounded by people versus just surrounded by a stack of money or holding on to a ledger.
I think for me, the last thing I'd want to say is that it's Mark 4:24. with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you and more. So like if you just measure in money, you'll just be measured back in money. Like, great. That's nice. But if you measure in something, if you measure in moments, it'll be measured back to you. Moments will be measured back to you. These will be the things in your life that become valuable, that everyone else around you understands that you value, right? It's just, your life will just radically improve.
Well said.
Awesome.
Right.
Thank you everyone for jumping in, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks for tuning in to Better by Bitcoin. Bitcoin makes everything better. Like, subscribe, and follow us on X at BetterBYBTC, YouTube at BetterBYBitcoin. Not financial advice, mathematical certainty.